On Vivian's 28th birthday, something happened that snapped the last thread holding my silence together. In the middle of the celebration, someone presented her with a person as if he were a luxury accessory. Right there, in front of everyone, in front of me. For once, I didn't fade into background. I picked up a wine glass, slammed it onto the marble floor, and let the sound cut through the music and laughter. Shards scattered. Conversations died mid-sentence. I didn't wait for permission or explanations. I went upstairs, stuffed clothes into a bag, and walked straight out of the house. Behind me, I could almost hear the predictions forming. 3 days, they said. I wouldn't last longer than that. An orphan with no real family, no safety net. Where could I possibly go? They were certain I'd return humiliated and desperate. Vivian didn't even bother pretending to worry. To her, the mansion wasn't just a home. It was leverage. She assumed it would pull me back like gravity. But 3 days stretched into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Whispers replaced certainty. Some people even wondered if I had disappeared for good. That was when Vivian finally tried to reach me, only to discover the number she had was long dead. Much later, at a high-profile gallery opening, one particular painting stopped her cold. She stared at it like she'd been punched in the chest. Without hesitation, she offered a ridiculous amount of money to buy it on the spot. The artist refused with a calm smile, explaining it wasn't for sale. It was the most meaningful portrait she had ever created, of her husband. That moment didn't make sense to Vivian. Not yet, so let me rewind. That night, I had worn a custom suit that cost more than most people's cars. Vivian linked her arm through mine as we descended the staircase, cameras flashing, guests admiring. But the second we reached the bottom, her grip vanished. She drifted into the crowd, radiant and magnetic, while I was left standing alone. Suddenly invisible, gifts piled up around her. She barely glanced at them, waving staff over to clear them away. None of it impressed her. She was already bored. Then someone unveiled the surprise. A handsome young man stepped forward, and the room shifted. I felt eyes slide toward me, some sympathetic, some amused, some openly cruel. I knew those looks well. I'd been wearing them for years. For a brief moment, Vivian looked caught off guard. The resemblance was uncanny. He looked like the man she had loved before me, the one who never made it to 30. But shock quickly twisted into amusement. The audacity delighted her. The gift-giver laughed it off, praising her status, joking that a man like me wouldn't dare object. That assumption cut deeper than the insult itself. They didn't think I agreed. They thought I didn't matter. To them, I was just a charity case who married up. Vivian toyed with her ring, enjoying the tension, and casually gave permission to take him away to a private wing. That was when something inside me finally collapsed. I stepped forward, meeting the stranger's eyes, and felt nothing but bone-deep exhaustion. I was done pretending, done performing gratitude for scraps of dignity. I tipped over the towering display of champagne. Crystal exploded. Wine flooded the floor. The room erupted into chaos. Someone shouted that I'd lost control. Maybe I had, but for the first time, it was mine. I expected anger. Instead, Vivian looked uninterested. The staff immediately moved into damage control mode, already calculating how fast they could erase the mess. The new man stayed at her side, silent, intense, fitting neatly into the image she preferred. Standing there, I was painted as the unreasonable one. She spoke to me calmly, almost kindly, asking why I was upset. She offered solutions, separate houses, separate spaces, assurances that I'd never be thrown out. Even he joined in, suggesting that a woman like her shouldn't be limited to just one man. That was the moment I realized something simple and brutal. I wasn't her partner. I was her possession. I wasn't about to let anyone decide my place for me. I slipped the ring off my finger and placed it gently on the table between us. Calmly, I told her she could keep it. Vivian studied me for a second, then flicked the ring into the air like it was a coin. The diamond flashed once before landing back in her hand. Without missing a beat, she tossed it toward the man beside her, laughing as she said a ring like that deserved someone who actually wanted it. She rose from her seat, amusement freezing into something sharp. With a clipped tone, she told the house manager to make sure everyone learned how to behave properly. Disrespect She said, wouldn't be tolerated again. Then she paused, turned back, and removed her own ring. It hit the marble floor, spinning in tight circles before stopping right in front of my shoes. If rings meant nothing, she said, then none of them mattered. She walked away without another glance, her entourage following like shadows. Outside, the roar of luxury engines shattered the silence. The housekeeper sighed beside me, muttering that I always knew how to anger her. I didn't respond. I picked up the ring at my feet and dropped it into the trash. Told her she didn't need to worry about me anymore. No one tried to stop me. Upstairs, I changed into a plain shirt, filled a suitcase, and took one last look around the room that had never really been mine. For any normal couple, this would be the moment to argue over contracts and property. But there was nothing to divide. Our marriage existed only in public photos, and that discarded ring. There had never even been paperwork. On our wedding day, she had warned me her registry would always carry one name beside hers, and it wasn't mine. She said we never should have gone through with it. I heard her. I just chose not to listen. 7 years of loving someone can make you believe patience is the same thing as hope. It isn't. When I left the villa, the halls were silent. The stillness reminded me of the night I was first brought there as a kid, soaked from the rain, unsure if I belonged. Back then, she had stared at me like I was an inconvenience. Minutes later, she brought me a glass of warm milk. Even then, kindness and distance lived side by side in her. I booked the first flight out. After hours in the air and a long drive south, I arrived in a town small enough that people noticed new faces. They say age pulls you back to where you started, but truthfully, even someone with nothing still misses the ground they first stood on. I rented a modest house with a tiny yard. The accent sounded half familiar, half foreign. I'd left too young and stayed away too long. At the market, I struggled to understand the vendors until a woman nearby stepped in to help. She just moved there too. The next evening, I cooked a simple meal to thank her. That's when I learned she was an artist, chasing inspiration rather than status. She carried herself lightly, like someone who hadn't learned to be afraid of living yet. Being there, away from the suffocating weight of expectations, I realized something that startled me. I was only 25. For years, I felt decades older. Responsibility had aged me faster than time ever could. I planted roses in the yard, bought a second-hand rocking chair, and watched the afternoons pass without anyone demanding anything from me. It wasn't grand. It wasn't impressive. But for the first time, it was honest. Those magnolia trees were untouchable. Years ago, when Nana suggested replacing them, Vivian exploded. She said if the trees disappeared, there would be no reason for me to stay either. After that, no one ever mentioned it again. Liam, the magnolias, the piano, everything tied to him became forbidden ground in that house. That afternoon, someone knocked on my courtyard gate. When I opened it, Chloe stood there in an oversized hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes bright with excitement. She pointed toward the mountains behind town and asked if I wanted to join her the next morning to paint the sunrise. She admitted it was a popular spot, but swore the view was worth it. Then, as if reading my hesitation, she added that she camped often and knew exactly what she was doing. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. She proved she wasn't exaggerating. She hauled her own gear and painting supplies without complaint, refusing my help like it was an insult to her strength. On the trail, we talked. I realized how small my world sounded when spoken aloud. My life reduced to one family, one woman, one suffocating role. Chloe's stories were the opposite. Unfinished plans, bold dreams, and a stubborn belief that life was meant to be explored. She said her goal was to become a well-known painter, said it like it was a promise rather than a wish. Then she laughed and confessed she'd run away from home to chase it. If the house next door suddenly emptied, she joked, it meant her family had finally dragged her back. I smiled, thinking how different we were. She had people who would come for her. If I vanished completely, no one would chase me. We reached the top just as the sun dipped low, bathing the town in warm gold. Chloe was already pitching the tent while I stood there, stunned by how quiet everything looked from above. When I asked if she planned to paint the sunset, she shook her head. She preferred sunrises. New beginnings, she said. Clean starts. That phrase stayed with me as night settled in. Leaving the Hawthorne estate had taken courage. But part of me knew I was still hiding. A small house, a small town, no real plan. I wasn't running towards something. I was just running away. She handed me food and water, then stretched out on a mat and invited me to lie down and look at the stars. At the estate, everything I did was monitored, corrected, judged. This, lie on the ground under an open sky, had never even crossed my mind. Before I could overthink it, she tugged me down beside her. The sky felt endless. We talked until sleep crept in, and somewhere between her laughter and the silence, I made a decision. Hiding wasn't living. If I wanted freedom, I had to move forward, not just disappear. I needed a future that didn't orbit around one person. I slept better in that thin tent than I had in years. In the morning, the light woke me. Chloe was already at her easel, completely focused. The sunrise warmed my skin, and for the first time in a long while, the word beginning felt real. When she told me to stay still, I realized she was painting me. Modeling turned out to be exhausting. But when she finished, she thanked me with a gentle massage that made me close my eyes and forget everything else. Back in town, I turned on the TV, and there she was. Vivian filled the screen like nothing had changed. Same poise, same control. When asked about rumors surrounding her marriage, she dismissed them with a faint smile, saying I was just throwing a fit and would return soon enough. I understood then how she saw me, a possession that wandered but always came back. The reporter pressed, mentioning the assistant she'd been seen with recently. For the first time, her expression cracked. Her hand moved instinctively toward a ring that was no longer there. Somewhere behind that composed exterior, she realized I hadn't just stormed off. I'd left. She remembered the empty closet, the call from the staff. She convinced herself it was a tactic, that I'd come back once reality hit. Without Nana, she believed I had nowhere else to belong. So she told him not to search. The interview quickly shifted to business, and her mood lifted instantly. Work never disappointed her. I turned off the TV, poured a glass of water, and opened my laptop. This town was peaceful, but peace alone wasn't enough. Jobs were scarce, and comfort could easily turn into another cage. If I was serious about starting over, I couldn't stay still. I began rewriting my resume. It was time to step out. I kept working until the sky darkened outside the window. When my shoulders finally stiffened from sitting too long, I thought about food, nothing fancy, just something warm. As I ate alone, a thought crossed my mind. Had Chloe eaten yet? When she painted, did she forget the world the same way Vivian used to? Back then, Vivian skipped meals constantly. Nana worried, and I became the one delivering food to her office. At first, her assistant treated me like an interruption that needed managing. Eventually, she stopped fighting it and let me in, knowing I'd leave quietly once Vivian took a few bites. The memory made me exhale slowly. I grabbed my jacket and walked next door. When I knocked, there was no answer. I was turning away when the door finally opened. Chloe stood there holding a brush, irritation melting into delight the second she saw me. Paint streaked her clothes, smudged her cheek, tangled in her hair. Somehow it suited her. She laughed, saying she'd been painting me when I showed up like magic. I asked if she'd eaten. Her stomach answered before she did. She dropped the brush with theatrical relief and followed me without hesitation. After that, it became routine. She came over for meals, helped wash dishes, even took an interest in the little garden. Watching her move through the house so naturally, I caught myself thinking how nice it would have been to grow up with someone like her. A sister, maybe, someone uncomplicated. Replies started coming in from the companies I'd contacted. Interviews were scheduled. On the morning I planned to leave town, I went to say goodbye. That's when I saw the cars. Several black sedans lined the street outside Chloe's place. Men in dark suits stood watch, scanning the area like they owned it. I hesitated before walking over, and one of them stepped forward to block me. Before I could speak, Chloe appeared. The warmth she usually carried was gone, replaced by a composed authority I hadn't seen before. She took my hand and led me inside, shutting the door behind us and ordering the men to stay out. Once we were alone, Her familiar brightness returned as if someone had flipped a switch. I told her I wasn't there for dinner. I was leaving. Her reaction was instant and loud. She demanded to know where I was going. I explained about the interviews, about wanting something more than a quiet hiding place. I reminded her of what she'd said on the mountain, that every day offered a chance to start again. Then she asked a question that caught me off guard. Had I truly let go of her? I didn't need to ask who she meant. When I nodded, Chloe smiled knowingly, saying artists notice things others miss. I felt oddly exposed hearing it spoken out loud. I told her I was heading back to the capital. It was where my life had actually happened. School, friendships, memories. I didn't see why I should abandon it just because Vivian existed there. She didn't hesitate. She said she was coming too. Before I fully processed it, I found myself riding back with her, listening to her excited plans, while my own anxiety about crossing paths with my past faded into the background. The city welcomed me back more easily than I expected. I landed the job and secured a small apartment near the office. Chloe vanished for a couple of days, and I assumed she was settling in with her family. Then, one evening, I took out the trash. Movers were unloading furniture next door. I spotted Chloe inside, confidently directing them like this was always the plan. When she saw me staring, she grinned. She said she wanted to surprise me. But you figured out anyway. Chloe laughed it off and casually took the trash bag from my hands like it was nothing. She said she'd been craving my cooking and decided the easiest solution was to move in next door and freeload. Her tone was light, but I didn't miss how naturally she settled into the space, as if she'd always belonged there. Having her nearby made the city feel less unfamiliar. I told her I'd cook something to celebrate, and for simplicity, we settled on hot pot at my place. The broth bubbled, steam filling the room. Chloe cheerfully dropped slices of meat into my bowl. One bite sent heat racing up my spine, and I reached for my drink without thinking. She laughed, pointing out that I clearly couldn't handle spice anymore. I told her it was just rust. I hadn't had it in a long time, and that was true. I used a Love Spicy hot pot. Nana always sat across from me with her mild broth, smiling while I sweated through mine. Once, on a snowy night, I convinced Vivian to go out after working late. We ordered a divided pot to suit both tastes. She barely touched it and complained the whole way home about the smell clinging to my clothes. After that, spicy food quietly disappeared from my life. Tastes fade when you deny it long enough. But that night, as the heat settled in, the old enjoyment came back. I laughed, wiped my brow, and finished my bowl. Chloe cleaned up afterward without being asked, stacking dishes, opening windows, tying up the trash before heading out. It struck me how peaceful everything felt. No tension, no anticipation of someone's mood shifting. The city didn't react to my return at all. No headlines, no speculation. I'd always been invisible like that. The attention had moved elsewhere, onto Vivian's constant companion, the new assistant who appeared beside her in every photo. I scrolled through the images with detached curiosity. She let him fix her collar, guided her through crowds, accepted his umbrella, without comment. The resemblance to the man she'd lost was undeniable. I wonder if love could really be replaced that easily, or if it was something emptier than that. Information about Liam had always been sealed tight. No leaked photos, no stories. People online speculated endlessly about my disappearance, but the world moved on quickly. If I were still in that house, I'd probably be waiting alone for someone who never came home. Instead, my days filled with meetings, schedules, plans. One evening, as I worked on my laptop, Chloe leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. I nudged her away, telling her to stop treating me like a child. She responded by closing my laptop and reminding me there was an actual woman sitting right in front of me. She called Vivian an older woman. I burst out laughing, imagining the expression that word would earn me. When I finally caught my breath, I noticed Chloe watching me closely. She asked if that woman was the one who'd hurt me. She said Vivian's name casually, like it wasn't untouchable. I stared at her, surprised. I didn't remember seeing her anywhere near that world. She shrugged and said her mother used to make her call Vivian Auntie. That did it. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. I told her they were practically the same age. She pinched my cheek and insisted Vivian just looked older. For the first time in a long while, thinking about her didn't weigh me down. It felt distant. She had grown up inside the family business, carrying responsibilities most people didn't touch until much later. Compared to everyone around her, she was always ahead of her age. Saying she seemed older wasn't exactly unfair. Chloe leaned in so close that I finally noticed I was stretched out on her lap, laughing like I didn't have a care in the world. I tried to sit up, but she held her ground, demanding an answer. So you're the Arthur who vanished from the Hawthorne house? I admitted it. No point hiding anymore. Her eyes sparkled as she joked about being my secret girlfriend. I flicked her forehead and told her not to say things like that. I'd already walked away from that world, returned the ring, and if paperwork was needed, lawyers could handle it. I told her there was nothing to file. We had never been legally married. Saying it out loud left a bitter taste. The relationship everyone admired had been held together by nothing more than a ring and a public performance. No documents. No legal bond. I'd played the role so long that even Vivian seemed to forget it had never been official. Chloe clapped once, satisfied. Then marry me. I stared at the certificate in my hands later, feeling detached from reality. Once, I'd imagined a different name beside mine. I never thought the person standing there wouldn't be her. The night before, Chloe had talked me into a temporary arrangement. Something to quiet her family. Nothing complicated. She snatched the paper from me and said she'd show it to her parents first. Apparently, they thought she was bluffing. It was strange. Years ago, I'd stood through an extravagant ceremony that meant nothing legally. Now there was no celebration, no audience, just ink on paper. And yet, this felt calmer. No illusions, no promises made to impress anyone. Chloe returned with a smile, announcing that her parents had agreed to fund her exhibition. She said it was her strongest work so far. A month later, the gallery was packed. I finished work late that evening and hurried over. For a moment outside, I thought I saw Vivian. I dismissed it as coincidence. Same posture, same silhouette. Inside, excitement buzzed through the crowd. Groups of young artists rushed past me, sketchbooks in hand, talking about getting Chloe's autograph. Someone mentioned it might be her final exhibition, which confused me. I thought this was her first. I followed their gaze and saw her surrounded by people, signing patiently, completely at ease. Near the entrance, I read the display introducing her. That was when I realized the truth. She wasn't an emerging artist. She was already established. Her past exhibitions had toured the country. Her work sold for prices that made my throat tighten. The woman described on that board felt distant from the Chloe who cooked with me and laughed on my couch. For the first time, I hesitated. Instead of walking toward her, I turned and left quietly. Outside, I saw Vivian standing near the road, phone pressed to her ear, frustration etched across her face. She kept dialing a number she already knew wouldn't connect. Still, she tried. Watching her, unease crept in. The one thing she'd always been thankful for when it came to me was my lack of ties. No family, no roots, no one to shield me. She believed I couldn't truly disappear. This time, she might have been wrong. She had always believed he belonged there. That no matter how far he wandered, the Hawthorne house would be the only place waiting for him. That belief made her careless. When the house manager mentioned his number had been disconnected, she dismissed it without a second thought. If something truly went wrong, the authorities would have called her. Until then, his absence was just another phase. Months passed. Nothing happened. Then she saw the painting. For the first time in a long while, her composure cracked. The face on the canvas resembled him, yet it didn't. The eyes were alive in a way Arthur's never had been, bright, fearless, burning like dawn. Arthur had always been quiet, restrained, like water that absorbed every impact without pushing back. He avoided conflict, retreated when hurt, disappeared when cornered. She remembered once finding him crying near the glass conservatory. The moment he heard footsteps, he fled as if caught doing something shameful. That weakness had always irritated her. Publicly, he played the role of a dignified husband. Privately, He shrank into himself. She wanted to buy the painting, thinking maybe seeing a stronger version of himself would change him. When the artist refused, saying it was a portrait of her own husband, Vivian felt an unexpected relief. So it wasn't Arthur. But the unease followed her out of the gallery. The silence had gone on too long. A small argument shouldn't last this many months. She called him again. Disconnected, her patience snapped. She ordered her people to find him and bring him back. That evening, Chloe was setting plates on the dining table when a knock rattled the door. Before either of us could react, men in dark suits stepped inside, scanning the room with professional speed. Chloe blocked their path instantly, demanding to know who they were looking for. Their attention landed on me, standing there with a spatula still in hand. They addressed me with a title I hadn't heard in months. It sounded foreign, almost absurd. They said Vivian wanted me back. Chloe stepped forward, placing herself between us, correcting them coldly. I was her husband. The guards hesitated. One of them made a call. Vivian arrived faster than expected. She stood in the doorway, fury barely contained, ordering the guards to move Chloe aside. Chloe didn't budge. She told her calmly that barging into someone else's home to take their spouse wasn't acceptable. That was when Vivian finally looked at her properly. She demanded to know if the man in the painting belonged to her. Chloe answered without hesitation. The marriage was legal. The man was hers. Vivian's gaze snapped to me, sharp and accusing. She demanded an explanation, telling me to come back, promising to pretend this never happened. She reached out like she always had. This time, I stayed where I was. I told her it was over, that I'd returned the ring, that there was nothing left between us. She laughed, disbelief twisting into anger. After everything the Hawthorns had done for me, she said, I thought I could simply walk away. Her eyes burned red with fury. But for the first time, her anger didn't frighten me, because I wasn't standing in her house anymore. She didn't even notice the tension in the room before grabbing my hand, gripping so hard it hurt. Her voice was sharp, desperate, irrational. She told me to divorce Chloe immediately, insisted that marriage was what I wanted, that we could get married instead. That was when something inside me finally snapped. I raised my hand and struck her. The sound cut through the room like glass shattering. Everything froze. For a long second, no one moved, not even her. It took time for the reality to register on her face, disbelief turning slowly into fury. She demanded to know if I'd lost my mind. I told her calmly that I was done. I didn't want the marriage, the title, or the life attached to the Hawthorns anymore. She could bring anyone she wanted home, Julian, or anyone else who reminded her of the past. It didn't matter. We should both move on. She laughed, bitter and sharp, and said I didn't get to decide. I was raised by her family. If I was going to disappear, I should disappear with them. Then she grabbed me and tried to drag me out by force. Before she reached the door, someone blocked the way. One of Chloe's security team had arrived, voice steady, warning her plainly that taking me would be kidnapping. Chloe stepped forward, fearless, declaring that no one was taking her husband anywhere. I stood there stunned. I'd never imagined it would come to this. I honestly believed she'd be relieved when I left, that she'd welcome the freedom. Watching her now, I couldn't even tell who this performance was meant for. Someone swung first. I didn't see who. Chaos erupted. Chloe moved instantly, positioning herself in front of me while calmly directing her people. The room turned into a silent standoff. Two sides, neither willing to retreat. Chloe's side clearly had the advantage. She told Vivian firmly that this wasn't her world anymore. Laws existed. This kind of behavior wouldn't end well if repeated. I tugged Chloe's sleeve, worried about consequences later. But when I looked back, Vivian already looked defeated. I'd never seen her like that, angry, cornered, powerless. I told her to go home and not come looking for me again. I pulled Chloe inside and closed the door. She immediately checked my face, her voice soft now, asking if I was hurt, if I was scared. I shook my head, told her I was fine, and reminded her, awkwardly, that this was still supposed to be a fake marriage. She leaned in and kissed me before I could finish the sentence. She said it worked better than medicine. I handed her a glass of water and tried to regain some composure, pointing out that we'd agreed on paperwork, not reality. She smiled like she'd won something important and admitted she only wanted the legal title, so no one could take me away again. I called it fraud. She shrugged and said she'd already sacrificed her career path for freedom. If this was fraud, she'd been committing it her whole life. Then she added dramatically that if I divorced her, she'd be doomed to work forever alone. That was when I finally understood why she called her last exhibition the end. I tapped her forehead and told her not to be ridiculous. She took that as permission. She asked if she could kiss me openly now. She didn't wait for the answer. Somewhere between laughter and surrender, I stopped resisting. She was relentless, playful, unapologetically bold. By the time I tried to regain control, I was already done for. Later, I finally understood what she meant when she said she had stamina. Not long after, we moved to a new place together. And for the first time in my life, the future didn't feel like something I had survived. It felt like something I could actually choose. She said the move was just to make sure Vivian couldn't interfere anymore. For a while, life was quiet. Until one day, Chloe dragged me into a boutique and started pointing at suits like this was the most natural thing in the world. That was how I found out we were actually having a wedding. She looked completely serious when she told me she'd been planning it since the day we signed the certificate. She said she wanted me to be the most handsome groom she could imagine, and that she'd already pictured it while painting. I didn't argue. There was something disarming about how certain she was. She handled almost everything. Venues, invitations, schedules. I mostly got intercepted by her mother, who asked for my opinion now and then, smiling like I'd already been part of the family for years. While visiting a hotel garden to check a venue, we ran into Vivian. I instinctively turned to leave, but she'd already seen me. She called my name and walked over, her voice unsteady. She asked me to come back. Promised she'd take care of me for the rest of her life, just like Nana had asked her to. She reminded me that the estate was where I grew up, that it was my home too. I gently pulled my hand away. I told her that in all the years I lived there, I was never treated like family. I had one once, and I'd lost her. Now I had another. All I wanted was to be left alone. She stood there as I turned away. Chloe's parents welcomed me in a way I never expected. When they learned I had no family left, her mother held my hand with genuine warmth and said she would be my mother from now on. There was no condition attached, no obligation to earn it. For the first time, I felt like I fit somewhere. I saw Chloe coming out of the hotel, waved, and jogged over. She straightened my coat, spoke calmly with the manager about details, and smiled when she turned back to me. I didn't look behind me as we left. From Vivian's side, everything unraveled quietly. She had always believed she understood people. Business had taught her to read intentions, anticipate betrayal, control outcomes. Yet the one person closest to her was the one she never truly saw. She thought he stayed because he had nowhere else to go. She thought silence meant acceptance. The marriage had been a formality for Nana's sake, never something she took seriously. The paperwork didn't matter to her. Neither did his feelings. She planted reminders of the past right in front of him, testing how much he could endure, assuming endurance meant weakness. When he finally broke away, she realized too late that he hadn't been waiting to be rescued. He had been growing. She waited for her people to bring him back, only to hear that he was married. The news hit harder than she expected. When she confronted him, his eyes no longer searched hers for approval. They were calm, decided, and when she saw how he looked at Chloe, open, trusting, unguarded, she understood something she'd never allowed herself to before. She had already lost him. The wedding invitation arrived not long after. The photo hurt more than she thought it would. They looked genuinely happy, radiant. She remembered their own wedding, grand, perfect, and empty. She hadn't even stood beside him for a picture, leaving everything to the staff as if it were a business event. She had assumed he'd always be there. Now he wasn't. He had left the Hawthorne behind. And she remained in a house that had once felt like control and now felt like a cage.